Well, welcome back, everyone. Today, I am very honored to have Dr. Voddie Baucham with me. Dr. Baucham, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Happy
Yeah.
to do it.
Quick introduction on you. You got a BA in Christianity and Sociology from Houston Baptist University, an MDiv from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, a DMin from Southeastern, so you covered all of the South there, and a postgraduate from Oxford. You are the founding dean and lecturer at ACU School of Divinity here in Zambia. You are a founding faculty member at the Institute of Public Theology. You've written 10 books, one of which is coming out June 4th, so in just over a month. You've voice acted in some films, George Washington Carver and Genesis, Paradise Lost. You opened the first jiu-jitsu gym in Lusaka.
Yeah, the first academy here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're a husband, a father, a grandfather, a church planner, former pastor, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So
lots of stuff, man.
yeah. First question is, have you managed to do so much?
I'm old.
You got time.
Yeah. I know. It just things just tend to accumulate, man. I'm never really thinking about finding things to do or ticking off new boxes or whatever. I'm just always looking for opportunities to be faithful, be obedient, be fruitful. And those are just some of the ways that those opportunities have presented themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start kind of back at the beginning in your childhood. You grew up a non-Christian, correct? And so you kind of saw that side of childhood. And your kids have obviously grown up Christian. What distinct benefits or blessings have your kids had that you didn't have growing up?
Yeah, it's always a blessing to have a foundation in God's Word. It's always a blessing to have. It's kind of like when Paul is talking in Romans, when he talks about what benefit is there in being a Jew, right? Much in every way. And he talks about this heritage, this rich, textual, theological heritage. And that's the heritage that our children have. They have this rich textual heritage. They grow up with the Bible. They have this theological heritage. They grow up with Christian doctrine. And they also have this sort of philosophical heritage, if you will, growing up with a biblical worldview. So growing up in that environment changes the way you think about everything. It changes the way you perceive the world. And it also exposes you to the gospel and exposes you to the transforming work of God in your life. So there's so many benefits.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on, like being a part of the church and having
a community
and friends, and our children are homeschooled. In a biblical, theological, Christ-centered, biblical worldview curriculum. I mean, it's endless.
Yeah. In your autobiography on your website, it says that you were when you heard the gospel in college, you were skeptical. You were unsure. Why was that? What about Christianity made you skeptical?
It wasn't just Christianity. It was anything. I was just skeptical of anything. I didn't think I needed anything. And the message of the gospel it's folly, right? We don't get it. We don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to outsiders. Not until the scales are removed from our eyes. Not until the Holy Spirit opens our minds and our hearts. So I was a skeptic because it was foreign. It was different. It was other. And it made claims on me that I didn't necessarily like.
Yeah.
I like the idea of being the master of my own fate.
Right.
Yeah.
Humans are scared of what they don't know.
Absolutely.
And that plays out in many ways. What's the it's good to be a skeptic to an extent. Where does that go too far?
I think when we view skepticism almost as our religion, right? It's our identity. I am a skeptic. That's how I identify myself. That's what distinguishes me. And so we think of everything that way, and we're proud of the fact that we think of everything that way. And instead of a healthy skepticism where we're asking questions with a view toward figuring things out, an unhealthy skepticism asks questions just for the sake of asking questions. I mean, I know you've been in this situation before. You sit with somebody, they're a skeptic, they're an unbeliever, they're asking you questions, and you give them an answer. And it's just, boom, this is what you asked for, boom, that's what you got. And instead of them saying, wow, that's awesome, they just immediately turn and go to something else.
Right.
They don't want to talk about that anymore.
They're not looking for answers.
No, absolutely not. They're just enjoying, asking questions, and they especially enjoy when they can ask questions that people can't answer, because that is where they get that sense of pride from.
Interesting. So you're saying it comes from a sense of pride.
Absolutely.
Of like, I don't want to be wrong about something, and so I got to always ask more questions.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not so much I don't want to be wrong. I just want people to perceive me as intelligent. I want people to perceive me as this brilliant, deep thinker.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like if you accept something as, if someone answers your question, you're perceived as not intelligent because you didn't ask a question that didn't have an answer.
Yeah. Well, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of what I would say a healthy skepticism would be, because I'm assuming I don't know everything, and so I'm asking questions. I'm trying to figure things out,
right,
so that I might come to know things that I don't know.
Yeah, humility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you deal with someone, you're in that situation and you've answered their question and they just have more?
Yeah, most of the time you just have to shake the dust off your feet.
Okay.
Yeah, you just have to shake the dust off your feet, and it's kind of like. This is not to demean people, right? But follow me so you see it's not demeaning. I was with a guy a while back, not long ago, with a working dog. And this working dog was a bomb-sniffing dog. I was at Answers in Genesis doing an event. And, you got to have security.
You got to have it, yeah, especially at Answers in Genesis.
Yeah, and the next day, guy came to church. He brought his dog to church, and eventually the dog comes to me and puts his nose under my hand. And the guy's wife is like, "Look at that." Well, the reason that happened is because I ignored him. I just,
Yeah.
Everybody else is trying to get closer to that. I just ignored him. I stood there, and and eventually he comes and he basically introduces himself.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the skeptics, what they're used to, and the reason I said all that at the beginning, because you compare them to dogs, but what they're used to is people who just chase them, right?
Right.
People who are, always trying to,
Well, what about this question?
Yeah. People chasing. But if they're doing that and you recognize that that's what they're doing,
yeah,
and you just leave them alone, right?
Yeah.
And don't play the game, then if they actually have authentic questions, they'll come to you with them.
Yeah.
But if you keep playing the game, they'll just keep.
They'll win their game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, to an extent, you ignore them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And also eventually, if you're not careful, especially if you have more of a combative kind of personality, you end up doing things that you regret.
Yeah.
And saying things that you regret and having interactions that you regret. It's like the old saying, you and a pig get in the mud. The difference is the pig likes it, and you don't want to be there.
Yeah. And you don't want to ruin the relationship, because that's eventually where you're going to build the foundation where you can criticize something.
Yep.
So you were also, going back to your childhood, you were raised in a single parent household, which like 50 years ago was not as common as it is now, especially in the West, and in America specifically. Why is it that we've seen an increase of single parent households in the past couple of years?
Yeah, over the past couple of decades, it's interesting when people talk about single parent households, and in my situation, black family, single parent household, there's a report called the Moynihan Report. I think the Moynihan Report was 1964, 65, and he talks about this issue of fatherlessness, and fatherlessness in the black community. At that point, the fatherless rate was about 20-25%.
Wow.
Since the late 80s, it's been over 70%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's dramatic.
Yeah.
And there's a number of things that lead, to that. And some of them are, political. Some of them are sociological. Some of them are cultural.
Yeah.
But there are a whole lot of things that lead to it. But in recent times, there's been this attitude that almost takes pride in it.
I kind of see what you mean. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we lionize women who, don't need a man, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of things that are progressing that. And it's not just in the black community. I use that because of the Moynihan report, but all, people groups are experiencing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that there's a movie 8 Mile about Eminem, which I've never actually seen, but I saw a scene from it in which Eminem is making fun of this guy for having 2 parents. And everyone's like, "Oh, what a good roast."
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Yeah.
we shouldn't be mocking that.
Yeah, no.
It's
No.
that's something that like we should be striving towards, but it's seen as you're a weaker person because you have an infrastructure of at least like caring for you behind you. What are the kind of downsides that you saw to not having a father or not having a mother?
Yeah, not having my father in the home. There were a number of things that I didn't understand until later, but even when I was a kid, I understood that things were difficult. Right?
Yeah.
My mother's life was hard. And I could see that even as a kid. But then growing up later and becoming a man myself, I recognized things that I needed that weren't there, things that I was hungry for. I wanted a man in my life. I wanted father figure in my life. I found sports and coaches and, I had those things, but that wasn't the same, you know. It just wasn't the same. And then I became a father myself. And being a father and seeing that relationship and, what it is that my wife and I have to invest, in order to raise our children. That has made me even more aware of the deficits that were there in my life without a father.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll talk about your book, Fault Lines, and kind of what happened in 2020. George Floyd died, and then people kind of went bug nutty all over the place. But
wait, people went what?
Bug nutty.
Bug nutty. Okay.
My dad uses it.
Okay,
Not entirely
right.
sure what it means.
Yeah.
But before George Floyd, there have been instances of white cops killing, black citizens, sometimes doing the right thing, sometimes doing the wrong thing, but they never had the consequences that this situation did. What was it about either the environment or that specific scenario that led to such an explosion?
There's a number of things. One, I think the cultural moment. There has been, the Black Lives Matter movement started way back in 2012.
Yes.
Right. And so, you had, the name just went. I got so many names in my head right now. But the Florida shooting, 2012.
Yeah.
Anyway, it'll come to me. But you had that. You had Tamir Rice. You had all these other big cases. These huge like Michael Brown
scandals.
Front page cases, and in these cases, the way these things were covered was really incendiary, right? And it's here we go again, and there's this murder of this black thing, and then time goes by, the rest of the story is told, and it's like, oh, it didn't actually happen like that, but the damage is already done, right?
Yeah.
And it's building, it's building. Then you get a guy who dies right there on a cell phone camera, right? I mean, there's this image, there's this video. This man dies, and people watch this man die.
Yeah.
And here's this cop on his back, and he's,
It feels personal.
It just, there was a visceral response,
Yeah.
Part of it was just our humanity crying out because somebody lost their life.
Right.
And then you add to it all of the rest of this, fuel to this fire that's been stoked for a long time.
Yeah.
And this narrative that's been promoted for a long time.
Right.
And it was just kind of a powder keg moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is it that the narrative has kind of led to that moment? The narrative has always kind of been incendiary.
Yeah. It's kind of the nature of, there's a couple of things. One, there are people who promote that idea. There are people out there whose livelihood is based on that narrative.
Right.
Right. You don't get, some of these, political figures that we have, the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharptons and, Benjamin Crumps, and you don't get those kind of people unless there's a narrative that says we need those kind of people, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is the nature of the news cycle. Everything's immediate. And so, there's a saying in the news, if it bleeds, it leads, right?
Right.
And when there's, some young person who's killed, some young black person who's killed, there's that immediate news story because there's 24-hour news cycle, right?
Right.
And so you get that immediate news story. And oftentimes presented in a very inflammatory and dishonest way.
Yeah. Because that's how you get clicks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's how you get clicks. That's how you get views. And I mean, there are so many people who that's all they have. That's all they know, right? Is that click and that view. And yeah, that's where we are. So when you have something that historically has been a real issue, and then you have all of these things that we've been talking about, it's a perfect storm.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that way, do you think that TikTok actually helped fuel this fire, especially in that incident?
Yeah, all of the social media stuff, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because you see the video and it's only a minute long, you can't tell a full story with that. What was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you see these snippets from different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. There you go. And then, obviously, Black Lives Matter, yes, but so do all lives, right? But if you were to say that, then you said that out loud, you're gonna get torn apart on Instagram.
Yeah.
So, why is it that there's such a visceral reaction against all lives matter, but you have to affirm Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, it was all part of the game. It was all part of. I mean, there's an ideology behind this, right? This neo-Marxist ideology, this oppressor-oppressed ideology. The narrative is that there is an oppressor and there are the oppressed, and we have to be on the side of the oppressed. Right? And that whole idea of the phrase, sorry, somebody keeps buzzing me.
No worries. If you need to take it.
Can we pause?
Yeah.
There's some pizza coming.
Ah.
And if the person is lost,
you got to help them out.
then they yeah.
They're very lost.
Okay, it wasn't that. Okay. Sorry. Otherwise, I just wouldn't even worry about it. But, because they're on the way.
Pizza guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pizza only stays warm for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can, coming around here, it's not like you got street names and street signs and,
There's very few street names in this. I tried to get something shipped to me on Amazon.
Yeah.
They were like, "What street are you on?" I'm like, "I don't have a street name.
Yeah.
I'm here. If you can find me, please do."
Exactly.
Yeah.
We do have a street name.
Okay.
And that messes people up because they're like, oh, wait, what?
What's wrong with you?
You have a street.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no sign.
Yeah.
There's the name of the street, but there's no sign.
No labeling.
And then the streets leading up to our street don't have names. So even if
So
you
it's
know
just
this
your
name,
street?
even if you don't know, they have names, but there's no signs, right? So, what good does it do you to have a street name
Yeah.
if there's no sign, and then the others coming up to it, there's no sign for those either, right? So anyway, all right, sorry. Back
No
to
worries. This is the thing in Zambia.
Yeah.
So here, let me. Why is it that kind of Black Lives Matter is triumphed as this?
Well, it's because of this oppressor-oppressed paradigm, right? We have to be on the side of the oppressed. There are people who are being oppressed, and the statement had to do with upholding this ideology, right? That we must be on the side of the oppressed.
Right.
And you have to say this in order to identify,
Yeah.
with the oppressed. And if you're saying, all lives matter or whatever, then essentially what you're doing is you're denying the paradigm. You're denying the oppressor-oppressed paradigm. You don't get it. Right.
Right.
Your head is not even in the game. You don't even realize what we're doing here. Right? This is not about recognizing all of humanity. This is about recognizing the paradigm of the oppressor and the oppressed.
But only some oppressor and oppressed.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
But why is that seen as, oh well, then obviously if it's oppressor oppressed, then we have to we have to follow the oppressed. We have to support them.
Yeah, and who the oppressed are this week.
True. Yes. It changes. Yeah. I remember at some point.
Some oppressed, but not others.
Right. At some point during COVID, people were figuring out this whole Black Lives Matter thing, and 1 week it was Mexican Lives Matter, and the next week it was nah, they're not part of it anymore.
Yes.
They're done.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah. It's. Do you think that in any way is planned out as far as we want to divide a nation, divide a people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes and no. I mean, there are and have been people who've planned this out. So, we talk about the neo-Marxist, we talk about the Frankfurt School, right? We talked about Antonio Gramsci and people like this who, very much high-level thinkers and so there are people who have made plans and executed plans. So yes.
Yeah.
But most people out there in the streets shouting slogans, they haven't been in on that.
Yeah.
They've just been influenced by it.
Right.
And they don't even know they've been influenced by it. Right.
Yeah.
So, if you have the neo-Marxists and the Frankfurt School who strategically target schools of education, journalism, political science, and then strategically create what's often called grievance industries, right? So,
yep.
Queer studies, feminist studies, when you have a massive growth of these things within the institutions, and then you have specifically with your education majors and whatnot going and teaching in our schools, that influence grows.
Right.
And you go from the 1950s and 60s to the 2000s, and you've got a massive number of people who've been influenced by the ideology.
It's like a wave that's kind of moved up. Yeah. And to an extent, it is Black people have kind of been oppressed in a sense that a majority of the people in the projects or the slums are Black. A majority of the single-parent households are Black, but that's not really that's not what they're trying to fix, or at least that's not what they're shouting out that they want to fix.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the issues with that is what you mean by fix.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you point out statistics and demographics and say, this group is experiencing more or less of this group has more or less of that, there's a couple of approaches that you can have. One approach that you could have is you could say, hey, let's do some investigation and try to figure out or your approach can be, oppressor-oppressed paradigm. Anytime you
Yeah.
see a disparity, what you have witnessed is oppression,
Yeah.
right?
Hundreds of years of
And so
white people taking
we
advantage.
already
Yeah.
know that. We already know that. So the answer, whenever you see that, is find the oppressor, right? Overthrow the oppressor, change it. So it's. But when somebody comes and looks at those types of things and starts asking questions like, "Let's analyze this. Let's think about this." Like, no, you
How
don't
can
need
we
to analyze
solve
this.
this problem?
You don't need to
Not
analyze
have
this.
an emotional reaction.
You don't need to
Yeah.
analyze this. We already analyzed this. We know what it is.
It's
right?
oppressor oppressed.
Critical race theory,
Right.
intersectionality have already analyzed it. Right? Here's the analysis. It's white people.
Right.
Don't say anything else.
I'm the problem.
If you say anything else, then you're just so
Yeah. You're denying it, and you hate black people
Yes.
because you're trying to solve this problem in a logical
Yes.
and not an emotional way.
Well, you hate black people because you're white.
Yeah, it's also
And you
true.
have to anyway.
Yeah.
You're just expressing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I say in the book Fault Lines. You asked me about fault lines. I have a line in there from this movie The Wiz, where Michael Jackson played the Scarecrow in The Wiz, and it's Wizard of Oz with a black cast. And the song that he sings when he's introduced is, "You can't win, you can't get even, and you can't get out of the game." Like
Yeah.
that, and
That's where we
it.
are.
That's where you are.
Yeah.
That's critical race theory and intersectionality as it relates to white people. You
Yeah.
can't win, you can't get even, and you can't get out of the game.
Yeah.
You know.
So, what is the Christian response, and how do Christians fix that problem?
Well, the Christian response, the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize what's happening. And that's kind of why I wrote Fault Lines. I wanted people's eyes to be open. I want you to see what's going on, because so many people were having conversations that they didn't even understand. They're talking to people, and it's like they were having two different conversations.
Speaking a different language.
They were speaking two different languages, right? And that was ideological. So first we have to understand that. We've got to understand the game that's being played. And then once we understand that, and we're able to analyze the worldview that's being deployed, well, then we have to subject that to Scripture, you know?
Right.
And when we subject that to Scripture, we have to then respond to falsehoods with truth, and ultimately with the truth of the gospel. That's where our hope is. And that's what was so sinister to me about this whole thing, is because if you're saying, racism is now not in the heart of man, but it's in structures and institutions, and we have to deal, with this issue of racism, well, then you're immediately taking it away from the realm where the real solution lies. Because if the sin is in here, we've got a solution for it, right?
Yeah.
And our solution is the gospel. But if it's out there and it's not really a sin, right? Now it's this sort of political, structural thing. Well, now the way we address that is not only completely different, but we divorce it from the gospel.
Yeah. Is that to an extent why so many Christians reacted poorly to Black Lives Matter and the events of 2020?
What do you mean when you say they reacted poorly?
I mean, like, many Christians and many churches kind of went along with it.
Yeah, I think they went along with it because it was so strategically brilliant. So you basically create this environment where you say things that are attractive to Christians. You condemn things that are hated by Christians. And then you give them phrases, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, Christians, racism. Are you racist or anti-racist? Well, I definitely don't want to be racist. I want to be anti-racist.
Right.
But we don't tell you what anti-racist means, right? Do you not believe Black Lives Matter? Or, yeah, of course I believe Black.
Right.
Do you think it's okay for people to be killed by the way? Well, of course I don't think it's okay for. So
Yeah.
you frame it in such a way that you touch on these Christian sensibilities.
Right.
And so a lot of Christians, now some Christians just went, full-blown cultural Marxist, right?
True.
But most Christians were just responding like Christians,
Yeah.
and somebody's coming to them and we're assuming that they're being honest and straightforward and, of course I think Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Of course I'm anti-racist.
Yeah.
Of course I'm,
The best lies have a little bit of truth in them.
absolutely. And the other thing is, we love one another. And so we had groups of Christians come in and saying, we're hurting and you're not listening to us.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a Christian and there's groups of Christians coming to you saying, we're hurting, you're not listening to us. As a Christian, what's your knee-jerk reaction?
Let me help them.
Let me listen.
Right. Yeah.
You're saying we're not listening. Let me listen. What am I not listening to?
Right.
That's the knee-jerk reaction. And so a lot of what was happening in 2020 was kind of the natural knee-jerk reaction. Unfortunately, for some people, they got sucked all the way into an anti-Christian worldview.
Yeah. Yeah. We seem to kind of, in the West especially, walk on shifting sands to an extent, especially right now. Times are somewhat changing. The world is moving in ways that we didn't expect and we didn't really want. We kind of wanted to live our little peaceful lives, and that's not really how the world is shaping out to be. The natural inclination of humans is to kind of infer that we are in a monumental time, that we're in the dividing line between, the Stone Age and the Bronze Age. Why is it that we always kind of want inherently to live in those monumental times?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. But we do. We want to be significant.
Yeah.
We want to be significant. And I think we also we overestimate ourselves,
Yes.
We just have this natural tendency to overestimate ourselves and our worth and our value, especially as Westerners, especially as Americans.
Yeah.
We're told so often, you're one in a million, you're special, you're yada, 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 you know. And it's kind of like the participation trophy thing, right? If everybody gets a trophy, then a trophy is meaningless.
Yeah.
If everybody's special, then special doesn't mean anything.
No one's special.
And so we're always striving to be what we've been told,
Right.
Yeah. And more often than not, we're not. I mean, we're just not.
Yeah. It's just that we want to be
Yeah.
something great, or at least we want to be part of something great.
Yeah.
Even if we ourselves are not. But there are obviously real problems that are happening, and there is a real battle being had.
Mm-hmm.
So what do Christians need to do, and what does the culture, what needs to happen across the West, across America, to get us back to kind of where we were or forward to where we should be?
Revival. We need revival, and we need to start with, there has to be repentance. There has to be an awakening, an acknowledge of our sin and our need. There has to be, and there's no shortcut.
Yeah. Yeah. There do seem to be, though, some, back to kind of fault lines a little bit, there is some real, actual racial tension in the States, but then most of it, I feel, is actually made up by the media, or at least inflamed by the media. Most of the time, I meet a black person and we don't have any problems, but according to the media, we do. Yeah. Why is it that they're pushing for division so actively, and they're not hiding it? It's very out in the open.
Yeah, it's a power play. If what we're dealing with is this oppressor-oppressed paradigm, if there's an oppressor out there, if there's oppression out there, then it has to be dealt with. If there are people in power who are using that power to harm people, then we have to take that power from them. But you don't just take power. It doesn't just disappear.
Right. It goes somewhere.
It goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And where does it go? And the normal response for people is, well, it goes to the oppressed. No, not really.
Yeah.
It goes to the ones who were the champions of the oppressed.
Right.
Right?
Who was it? The person at the top of BLM bought $6 million mansions.
Well, not only that, but there's all this stuff about oppression and white people this and white people that, and then who gets ushered into the White House? A white guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And an old run-of-the-mill racist
about to fall
white
apart
guy.
Yeah.
Right? And what did the white guy do to get there? Well, he got a person with a ethnically mixed background, and made that person the vice
president,
presidential
yeah.
candidate, right? Pandering,
Yeah.
right? So we use the oppressor-oppressed paradigm, and then power goes where,
Yeah.
right? Not to the oppressed people. Again, according to the
Right.
the power goes to the people who stand up and say, "I'm their champion."
Yeah. Which is interesting. I remember the moment during Joe Biden's campaign when he was on a show with a black guy and he said, "If you vote for Trump, you ain't black."
Yeah, if you don't know whether or not you're voting for me, you ain't black. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, among other things,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Poor kids just as good as
smart
white
as white kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, he's a disaster.
Yeah.
And if he makes it another 4 years, then
Yeah.
I would be shocked.
I would say I'd move, but I've already moved.
Yeah, fair. You're already out here. Yeah. So you take that off the checklist. But it seems that there has kind of been because of that, because the left has so actively grabbed the black community and said they're ours. Seems that there's been a kind of a movement away from the left by many black people. Is that true, or am I reading that wrong?
It is. It's interesting. Donald Trump's numbers, for example, were better in 2020 than they were in 2016 among minority voters, and looking like they're, even better now, among minority voters. I mean, yeah, a lot of people are waking up to that.
Yeah, yeah. Especially, I think, because it's been so violently, you're ours.
Yeah.
You're you vote for me, you ain't black.
Yeah.
If you vote for Trump, you ain't black.
Yeah. But unfortunately, that didn't tip the needle for most people.
Yeah. They were just like, he messed up.
Yeah. He messed up. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's crazy.
Yes. There's a whole lot of that.
I got about another 10, 15.
Great.
Okay.
Sounds good. Why is it that a majority of people who live in the slums or in the projects are black?
Well, that's actually not the truth.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's not the truth. In fact, the poorest group of people in America live in Appalachia, and they're white.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so if you're just talking about sheer numbers of people, the majority of people on welfare are not black people.
Yeah.
Right? Black people are only 12% of the American population.
True. Yeah.
But there is this sense of what we're shown and what's presented to us, and we tend to equate that. But it points out something else. It points out that because if we're really about people who are poor, and if we're really about people who don't have opportunities and don't have this, that, and the other, we'd know about Appalachia.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But because those people are white, they're inconvenient.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's people, they're inconvenient. By the way, the wealthiest group of people in the United States are Asian immigrants.
Yep.
Right? Guess who's behind the Asian immigrants? Nigerians.
Really?
Nigerians have more wealth than white people in America. But that's inconvenient.
Yeah. That doesn't go well with the narrative.
No, because they're black.
Yeah.
And so
they're supposed to be oppressed.
Yes. So if we start explaining that, then we have to look.
It's not a cookie cutter explanation.
The color of your skin, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and at the end of the day, what you get to is there are things in people's cultures that perpetuate themselves. There are things that cultures prize, that they see more of and get more of. And some cultures prize hard work, diligence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The Asians are especially good. They're out here.
Yeah. And
they're everywhere.
Yeah, and some cultures prize, violence and profanity and, you know what I mean? And the things that we prize as a culture, the things that we value as a culture, tend to be the things that we get more of.
Yeah.
But you can't have that conversation because, then people will say, "Oh, well, you're victim blaming. Oh, well, you're whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, the downside of that is if these cultural issues are important and then we're told not to address them, then we're not addressing the very thing that will help people change their lives.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. In African Americans and Africans here are very different, but I can't really pinpoint where that difference lies.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also Zambians would be very different from, Ghanaians or Nigerians or,
Yeah.
but yeah, and where the difference lies is we're talking about culture, right? I mean, my family has been in the United States for 7 generations. I tell people all the time, if there's one thing that I've come away from with this experience of living here, it is I have become painfully aware that I am not an African.
Yep.
I have a very different worldview and a very different culture.
Yeah.
I think more people need to experience that.
Yeah. When you chose to move to Zambia, were you moving to Zambia or away from the U.S.?
I was moving to Zambia.
Okay.
I love the U.S.
Yeah.
I love the U.S. And we have family who's back there. There's just the 9 of us here. My grandkids are there, and our older children are there.
Yeah.
And again, 7 generations of my family.
Right.
And our history and everything else is
Yeah.
there. So no, we're coming here specifically to be a part of this work and this opportunity at ACU.
Yeah. What potential do you see in ACU?
I think there's tremendous potential. Zambia is a very small country. There's about the size of Texas,
Mm-hmm.
with 16 or so million people.
Right.
It's a constitutionally Christian republic, so there's an openness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a tremendous need here for secondary and tertiary education. So, whether it's high school education, college education, there's a tremendous need here.
Yeah.
And tremendous opportunities for people who will get quality education with a sound worldview.
Right.
Tremendous opportunities and opportunities for influence and so on and so forth. So, yeah, there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. Yeah. In what way does ACU have a chance to shape Lusaka specifically?
Yeah, I think in terms of the kind of education that we're bringing, it's very unique here, and has the potential to influence the way education is done, but also in terms of the kind of graduates that we are producing,
Right.
who are just head and shoulders above what most people have seen.
Yeah.
They have the opportunity for personal influence.
Yeah.
And then, for influence beyond that in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a new book out on June 4th.
Yep.
It's Not Like Being Black, How Sexual Activism Hijacked the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah.
Can you give a little more on what that's about without spoiling it?
I've been talking about this for, almost 20 years now, but the homosexual movement grabbed onto the civil rights movement, and there was even an article in The Advocate, which is the leading gay, newspaper in America, and the title of the article was "Gay is the New Black." It was the cover of the magazine, "Gay is the New Black." The point that they were making was, we are the next frontier in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And so as homosexuals, sort of presented themselves as a people group and as an oppressed people group, this is the same thing. This is a continuation of that, So CRT, critical race theory, it's always critical race theory and intersectionality.
Yep.
And if you start talking about intersectionality, you're talking about overlapping oppressions. So if you're black, you're oppressed. If you're female, you're oppressed. So if you're black,
you're
female,
trans,
if you're
yeah,
trans,
yeah.
gay, right? So
You can get like the most oppressed person.
The eye always brings in sexuality. And so this movement has very intentionally grabbed onto the civil rights movement, and it has been incredibly successful and effective. You know, everybody's talking about Biden's new move with Title IX.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he changed Title IX,
Yeah.
added sexual identity to Title IX, and everybody's like, "Oh, he did this in Title IX." Most people don't know what Title IX is.
It really is, yeah.
If there's a 9, then there had to be an 8 and a 7.
There's a lot of
and
titles.
6 and a 5. But Title IX of what? This is the Civil Rights Act.
Really?
This is the Civil Rights Act.
Aha.
So we start with race, right? And then you continue to move.
You work your way.
You work your way. Yeah. And so, you know, Title IX was about, you know, women. And now the T in the LGBTQIA+ has gotten somebody in the White House who has leveraged that in order to complete the coup.
Yeah.
Right? But what is it all about? It's all about attaching your sexuality to the idea of civil rights.
Yeah.
Gay is the new black. Trans is the new black. So that's what I'm dealing with in this book.
Yeah. So why'd you decide to write it now?
I decided to write it 15, 20 years ago.
Okay.
But nobody would publish it.
Oh, really?
You know? Nobody wanted to touch it.
Yeah.
And then Obergefell happens in 2015. Same-sex marriage becomes legal, and all this other stuff has really ramped up. And you know, so now people were like, they were eager to
Yeah.
to get on
They're
board.
like, all right, great.
Yeah,
Now's the time.
Sounds like a great book.
Yeah. Where can people find it?
Anywhere that books are sold. I mean, technically, anywhere that books are sold. A lot of places that books are sold are not going to want
To publish that,
to
yeah.
publish it. They want to hide the copies that they have. But
Yeah,
you know,
fair.
Yeah.
What is the number one piece of advice you would give to anyone watching?
Wow. Based on, you know, what we're talking about here, I would say just think critically, right? Just evaluate things that you hear on the news or things that you hear out in the culture. Think critically about it. Think biblically about it. And I believe that, and this is what I get to in the new book and somewhat in Fault Lines, this is a time where Christians are going to have to be courageous,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Because stuff that's happening now, you know, people's jobs are on the line.
Right.
People's
Yeah.
families are. People are losing their children.
Yeah.
Literally having their children taken away from them.
Yeah.
And so these things are as consequential as they come. And we're going to have to trust the Lord and be courageous and believe that the work that we are here to do, this gospel work that we are here to do, is important enough for us to count the cost and be courageous.
Yeah. Where can people find you on the internet as we wrap up?
Man, yeah, just look for Voddie.
Okay.
I'm one of the only ones.
Yeah,
anywhere.
fair.
You put Voddie in somewhere and you'll find me. Right?
You'll find you.
So VoddieBaucham.org or you know, Voddie B on you know, Instagram or whatever. But
Yeah. I'll try and put as many links as I
find
can
me.
in the
You'll find
description.
blessings, man.
There you go. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you. See you guys.
You would be a little. You would be.